Hello everyone, my name is Sarafi and I'm happy to meet you all. And today I'm going to be discussing Mulcharmies and what they have done for the TCG and the OCG. This is inspired by Farfa's video on the subject, which I'm not going to be playing because he's a much bigger content creator than me and I don't want to be leeching off of his screen time, obviously. He has a very excellent video. I will put a link to it in the description. You should definitely watch it, but I'm not trying to ride his coattails or anything. It's just that when he put it out, I was also like, oh, I should talk about this too, because I've been meaning to talk about this and just never had an opportunity. So, the Mulcharmy cards, in particular Mulcharmy Fuwalos, have hit the scene. Fuwalos was printed on October 10th of 2024 for the TCG and July 26th of 2024 for the OCG. For those of you that don't know what this card does, it's a level 4 Wing Beast, and it says if you control no cards, as a quick effect you can discard this card, apply these effects this turn. Each time your opponent special summons a monster from the deck and or the extra deck, immediately draw one card. Once during the end phase, if the number of cards in your hand is more than the number of cards your opponent controls plus 6, you must randomly shuffle cards from your hand into the deck so the number in your hand equals the number your opponent controls plus 6. You can only activate one other Mulcharmy monster effect the turn you activate this effect. So, there are three Mulcharmy cards. The other ones are Perulia, which sees play a lot in side decks as a way to kind of tech against certain threatening decks like Fuwalos. And then the last one is Meowls, which I don't think sees much play at all. Yeah, Mitsurugi plays 0 and 93%. Dragon Ruler seems to be the primary deck that plays it. They play 3 in 50% of their lists. This card is not nearly as versatile. Each of the Mulcharmy cards is like a mini Max C, but they all have different restrictions on where the monster can be summoned from. And since Fuwalos in particular is from the extra deck, that's the one that's the most relevant for a lot of situations. So, there are arguments for and against the Mulcharmy cards and whether or not they are good for the game. And obviously, one of the main things to note is that the card is very similar to Max C, even though it has some key restrictions. Obviously, number one, if you control no cards, you can use this effect. So while Fuwalos is twice per turn, you have to control no cards to use it, which means that it's only useful to you if you're going second, which is arguably a good thing. It's arguably one of the biggest changes that Konami has made to a hand trap in a long time that allows it to be more balanced specifically for going second. I do agree with this. But of course, in the OCG, it's a little bit restrictive to have both Max C and Fuwalos at the same time. Now, I will say that I think Fuwalos is a very necessary evil, and I'll tell you why. I think the only reason Fuwalos was printed, a lot of people thought that Fuwalos was printed specifically to get Max C banned in the OCG. and Max C did go to 2. But Max C has stayed at 2 for a long time. It's not going to get banned. So, there's a different reason why Fuwalos got printed. And it is a huge problem. And I'm going to talk about that as my primary focus. So, the reason I believe Fuwalos was printed is because there are 2 ban lists. I think that's a huge problem, actually. And it's reflected with this card. This card is the epitome of the problem in Yu-Gi-Oh! With 2 ban lists. We have TCG, we have OCG. TCG has had Max C banned forever. Okay. And then the meta between TCG and OCG looks wildly different. Even though we get the same cards, and the cards are printed by OCG, because TCG bans so many different cards, they have wildly different decks and strategies. In particular, one of the biggest problems that TCG has is that spamming monsters is completely unrestricted. You don't really have a whole lot of problems summoning as many monsters as you possibly can on turn 1 and ending with an unbreakable board. And that's why, in particular, the OCG has not felt it's necessary to ban Appaloosa, Barone, or Savage Dragon, because those cards are kept in place because they're so difficult to summon in multiple, without going through 8 cards. So people tend to be punished when they prioritize those cards as a means to a strategy by Max C. And since there's no Max C, then those cards have been running rampant in the TCG for ages, and people were dealing with multiple Omni Negates or multiple Negates no matter what deck they were facing. And so there was an argument that, well, these cards need to be banned. But there was never that argument in the OCG, because those cards, even though they existed and were powerful, were cards that were oppressed by Fuwalos. And instead, for the longest time, the OCG banned Dragoon, even though Dragoon was in the TCG at 3 for so long. Why was Dragoon banned in the OCG? Because when you get Max Seed, if you respond by saying Red Eyes Fusion Dragoon, Max C is now a neutral card. You only draw one card for it, and you have an Omni Negate. So because Dragoon could literally be summoned in one tick of Max C, and it was as powerful as Baronne de Fleur, that was the card that got banned in the OCG. Whereas in the TCG, even though Dragoon is a very powerful card, it's very flexible, it's very easy for a lot of people to play it and make it, because Baronne was not a problem to summon for so many people, then Dragoon got left alone and people just played Baronne anyway. Now, obviously that has been adjusted somewhat, but you have to understand that there was no out for Konami in this situation. They could keep banning cards forever, but to be honest, it was just starting to get tiring for people. So they just said, okay, we need to introduce the TCG back to Max C because we are printing cards for the OCG, and these cards are with the assumption that they will be balanced by the fact that you have to play through Max C. And they were willing to say, all right, we will give 3 more Max Cs to the OCG because the OCG has already been dominated by Max C for so long. Fuwalos isn't actually going to be that big of a deal for them. Even though Fuwalos is the second most played card in the game, to be honest, for the OCG, it's just like, it just reinforces their existing meta. It doesn't really change too much. For the TCG, it has oppressed people. It's been like, okay, well, now you have to try and deal with this threat that you've never had to deal with before, and that makes certain decks worse than others. But the player base doesn't see it that way. The player base argues that this creates a mini game where it's just like, okay, well, do you have Fuwalos? Yes, no. If you don't, then I can play the game as much as I want. If you do, then I lose the game unless I have Ash Blossom, Call by the Grave, or Crossout Designator. That's true, certainly. That's one way to look at it. But the better way to look at it is you you forced Konami to print this card. This card got printed last year. Why? Because the TCG was running rampant with no Max C for, I think, 10 years. That's just too wildly different of a strategy. And I think that this is going to get worse. The longer that this goes on, the more and more likely it is that we're going to see cards that are printed that are so incredibly, that are powerful lingering floodgates that will stop you from playing the game or stop you from engaging in the game in certain ways, just to tamp down the TCG format, because the TCG format is not being held back by cards that are illegal in the OCG format. So kind of we brought this on ourselves, to be honest. I think that this is a bad thing, and I would rather, Farfa in his video said that there were multiple ways that you could deal with this. You could potentially try and add normal summon per phase, which would give the player who goes second 2 normal summons because they could go into their main phase too. Make Typhon better by allowing Typhon to, you could summon multiple monsters after Typhon, but only if you summoned it in the main phase 2 where there was a retrain of it or something. or there's always the idea that Disencoder and that I pitched before, which is that you could start the game with the player who goes second having 6 cards instead of 5, right? And then they don't draw a card on turn 2, so that they have more ways to interact with the opponent going first. These are all potential options. But in reality, what needs to happen primarily is that the game needs to be reunited. Because as long as you are printing cards that go to 2 different ban lists, you are going to have this problem. And you might say, well, this is no different than having formats in Magic the Gathering. That's incorrect. Absolutely incorrect. If I am a player and I don't like modern Magic the Gathering, I can go to a tournament and play Standard. I can go to a tournament and I can play Vintage. That's allowed, certainly. But if I am a English player and I want to play the OCG, good luck finding anyone who's going to run that tournament. I guess I could talk to my friends and maybe convince them, but are they going to have Max C? Are they going to reasonably own cards that are banned in the TCG that are illegal? Like, are they going to still have a copy of Barone? Maybe it hasn't been that long, but they probably sold it the second that the ban was announced, so they would get something back for it before the price tank. And that's the other problem. The other problem is that since there's wildly different ban lists, that means that the prices for cards in different regions are completely out of line. So so to fix this problem where you have constantly this issue of people going first, going second, and this being a problem, I honestly think the answer is to move everyone over to the OCG ban list. Because then you have to play with the cards that are written and printed, and that way the cards that are being printed for everyone and not just for Asia. Because it just creates these weird situations where, because the ban lists are so wildly different, and because things get adjusted at different rates, you have metas that look completely different from across the board, and that's just basically like printing one set of cards for two different games, which doesn't make any sense. It's not going to happen, and it creates a situation like this where the TCG desperately needed Fuwalos. They needed something other than Nibiru to stop people from summoning so much when they go first. And the problem was, Nibiru being the only interruption meant that cards like Barone and Appaloosa became even more important. It was, even though these cards were good end board pieces, the meta became about rushing them as fast as possible to stop yourself from getting Nibiru so you can play all your other cards. And that's because Nibiru was the only problem, and Nibiru couldn't be activated until 5 monsters. Fuwalos can be activated immediately. You can't Barone it. You can't Appaloosa it. And that's the benefit of it. That's the benefit of a card like Dimension Shifter, which also got banned in the TCG, by the way, I'm pretty sure. I feel like I mentioned that in my last ban list of the TCG. Oh, it's still at 1? Oh, disgusting. Regardless. I'm not saying that a card like Droll or a card like Fuwalos is healthy for the game. I am saying that there is a problem with going first that needs to be addressed, and the way that the Japanese address it is by printing specific cards, which tend to be for their decks. And then they print a card like this for our decks, because our decks have become so different and have been so different for so long, and that actually negatively impacts their decks, because now they have to deal with both Max C and Fuwalos. And part of that is the fact that they don't have a rotating format, which is arguably a problem. It is kind of cool that you can that they can print new support for a card for decks that are like 12 years old, and then you get to play that deck all over again. That's kind of like an interesting idea. I understand that part, but the fact that they don't have rotations means that like you get these weird situations where people print like new decks, and then one card that has not been relevant for 12 years suddenly becomes like a board-breaking meta ridiculous card, like Trident Dragon. Trident Dragon was like the worst card ever for years until Tenpai got released, and now it's like a ridiculously powerful broken card. So that's a headache, but arguably it is one of the biggest charms of Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'm not going to argue against that. But I do think that Fuwalos is representative of we let special summoning go unchecked for too long, because special summoning got power crept over and over again to become more valuable into Max C. And because TCG didn't have Max C, they got all those power crept cards and started abusing them way more than the OCG did. And now we have this situation where it's just all out of line. So, yeah, I know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. To be honest, I think Konami should decide on one ban list. They can take the best parts of the TCG ban list, the best parts of the OCG ban list, put them all together, and then force everyone to play on that ban list. Once they've done that, then they can print cards just for that ban list, and it becomes a lot more streamlined and a lot more predictable. Anyway, that's my thoughts. My name is Serafi, and I was thrilled to have all of you with me.